teachers, we are Group 2. In these videos, we will react to and analyze the videos how China could retaliate against US tariffs. Our discussion examines the escalations of the US-China conflicts, the potential tools China may employ in response, such as debt holding, rare element, and direct industry pressures, and the potential impact on supply chains, businesses, consumer, and global trade relations. The videos open by noting that China is the world's second largest economy, the second largest suppliers of goods to the United States, and a significant holder of U.S. Treasury securities. Against this backdrop, the White House has substantially increased tariffs on Chinese imports, with some rates more than doubling within a few months. Tariffs rose from 20% in January to over 120% by April. This rapid increase has already raised costs for American businesses and contributed to economic uncertainty. Many businesses now fear that trade could decline significantly, making production and investment planning extremely challenging. Although the United States seeks to reduce dependencies on Chinese goods, abrupt and substantial, tariff increase may have unintended consequences. Historical evidences, such as Orange 2017 on the smooth Harley tariffs, suggests that sudden tariff hikes often provoke retaliations and reduce global trade rather than promoting domestic industry reshoring. However, proponents of the U.S. tariff strategies argue that such measures could incentivize domestic productions, create American jobs, and protect national industry from unfair foreign competition, thereby balancing the short-term challenges with potential long-term gain. With this context, my teammates will now discuss various aspects of China's potential responses, beginning with the deep economic interdependencies between China and the United States.
Mutual dependence, how China and the United States rely on each other in trade, and how this dependence shapes their responses to tariff and retaliation. Mutual dependence in this case means that both countries are economically integrated. The U.S. depends on import from China for many manufactured goods, electronic, rare earth components, and other inputs. China depends on the U.S. as a major market for export, including agriculture, tech components, and more. Because of this, neither side can impose extreme measures without hurting itself. From the video, we see that when the U.S. raise tariff on Chinese import, China can really retaliate by imposing its own tariff on U.S. goods, especially agricultural products, raw material, or tech-related export. But China's level grade is limited by how much it needs the U.S. market. Similarly, the U.S. suffered from the highest cost for importing goods, disruption in supply chain, or scarcity of critical input. This mutual vulnerability constrains how far each side can go in its escalating trade conflicts. Importantly, mutual dependence forced both countries to balance short-term political or economic gains with long-term costs. Tariff might seem appealing as a leverage, but when retaliation begins, consumer farmer firms on both sides start to experience negative effects. Price hikes, lower export market, reduce competitiveness. In conclusion, this mutual dependence means that trade conflicts like they are never zero-sum. Both sides can win or lose. The most sustainable path then is negotiation or carefully calibrate policy that take into account how deeply interconnected the economies are.
In this section about China-US debt holdings, the video notes that China owns Treasury security equal to about 4% of US GDP. If China dumps a large share, it could put US yield up, hurt the markets, and rather confident, a so-called nuclear option. However, the video also suggests that China would actually follow through. They see the leverage more as a psychological or as a bargaining chip playing on fear rather than acting. I think this nuance is really important, and I tend to agree with the view that while the threat is real, a full on-damage risk is unlikely, and here's why. If China sold a large share of US debt, it would drive bond prices down and yield up, which would directly reduce the values of its own dollar-denominated holdings. And that's why analysts note China has already been slowly reducing its treasury reserve to limit this kind of risk. Furthermore, if China dumped US debt, the yuan would rally rise as demand for dollar fell. But a stronger yuan makes China export pricier abroad, a risky move when tariffs are already squeezing trade. The third one is that the fear that China could act give it diplomatic and economic leverage. Even discussion of this dumping treasury can move markets or force responses. A Federal Reserve US policymaker without China actually doing much. A report says the nuclear option is more often used as a deterrent than a plan. The next is about the US Treasury market is huge. Many domestic and foreign actors already buy US Treasury. For China to offload it, it would need willing buyer. And sudden selling might also trigger US in stabilizing markets as well. Plus, legal, political, and financial mechanics make it difficult to execute a dump without enormous costs. Although, I believe the videos are correct in presenting China and US debt holdings as a serious piece of leverage, but more so as a theoretical threat than tactical move China will want to use frequently. The most likely outcomes are small-scale adjustment, slowing purchases, subtly shifting reserve, maybe modest sale time carefully rather than a dramatic dump.
This video also indicates the dependence of the United States on China rare earth supply. Rare earths are a group of 17 chemically similar elements that are crucial for modern technologies and the defense industry. Most rare earth elements are abundant in nature. However, it is unusual to find them in a pure form, and they are very hazardous to extract. China has a near monopoly on extracting and refining rare earths. The explanation for this is that both the extraction and processing of these rare earths are costly and polluting. Additionally, all rare earth resources contain radioactive elements, and many countries, including those in the European Union, are reluctant to produce them. China's dominance in the rare earth supply chain is the result of decades of strategic government policies and investment. Nowadays, China supplies 60% of the world's rare earth elements. In addition, the US currently imports 96% of its rare earths from China. In April, China began ordering restrictions on the export of 7 rare earth elements in response to tariffs imposed by the US. These 7 elements, which are less common and are harder to process, are vital for the defense sector. Defense technologies including F-35Z Tomahawk missile and Predator unmanned aerial vehicle all depend on these materials. US manufacturing is also severely impacted. Prices for critical rare earth materials are expected to surge, increasing the immediate cost of components used in a wide range of products, from smartphones to military hardware, said Dr. Gavin Harper from the University of Birmingham. In order to update information, I did some further research. On June 11, US and Chinese officials finalized a new trade framework following 2 days of negotiations in London. According to President Trump, the agreement included a commitment from Beijing to resume exports of rare earth elements and magnets to the United States. Thanks to that, US automakers and suppliers have regained access to rare mineral and magnet supply chains. Also, China's exports of rare magnet to the US in June reached 353 metric tons, up 660% from the previous month. In my opinion, while the agreement may resume the flow of heavy rare to Western consumers, the instability of the US-China relations makes this likely to be temporary. President Trump's tariff policy has continually evolved, and China has increased its weaponization of various minerals over the last 2 years. The only long-term solution for the U.S. rare uh, crisis is to build alternate supply chains that reduce the dependence on China. Until the alternative supply chains are developed, China will retain its leverage, which poses a significant risk to the U.S. economy.
The video highlights the global ripple effect of the US-China trade war, and one of the clearest examples is supply chain disruption. When the US imposed higher tariffs on Chinese goods, the effect was immediate and very visible. Shipping activity slowed down at major American ports, and companies suddenly faced higher tariff and logistic costs. Many firms choose to hold their shipment in warehouses, waiting for policy changes, while others rush to diversify their supply route, turning to countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, or even Mexico. In the short term, the adjustment creates a lot of chaos and uncertainties. Small and medium-sized businesses were especially vulnerable since they don't have a financial strength to absorb rising costs. For them, even a short delay in goods arriving can mean missed contract or reduced their profits. It became clear that tariffs are not just numbers on a policy document. They directly affect how smoothly companies can operate on a daily basis. In the longer term, this disruption may reshape global supply chains. If high tariffs continue, more companies could permanently relocate part of their product away from China. On the one hand, this might weaken China's dominance in certain industries. On the other hand, the transition is neither simple nor cheap. US companies may pay higher input price and consumers could end up paying more for everyday products. At the same time, developing countries that attract new investment might benefit, but they also risk becoming overly dependent on unstable trade policies. For me, this part of the video makes one thing very clear. Trade wars rarely create a true winner. The US tried to pressure China, but reality, both sides, and even third countries are drawn into the consequences. In today's deeply interconnected world, once supply chains are disrupted, the effects spread far beyond the original conflict and affect across the global economy.
The impact of the US imposing higher tariffs on China affects both consumers and corporations in several ways. First of all, many products imported from China are cheaper than those made in the US. These include electronics, clothes, furniture, toys, and everyday household items. Where tariffs are applied, the import cost rises, and in almost every case, that cost is passed directly on to the consumer. This means that ordinary American families, including middle class and lower income households, end up paying more for the same items they used to get at affordable prices. So, in practical terms, tariffs can raise costs for households quite significantly. For lower income families, this is especially painful because a bigger share of their budget go to basic goods. From a corporate perspective, many iconic US firms rely heavily on China, either as a global factory or a massive consumer market. Take Apple as an example. The company produces the majority of its iPhones in China. Without the supply chain, Apple would struggle to keep prices competitive and its profit margins would shrink. Similarly, Tesla depends on its large factory in Shanghai to serve both Chinese customers and other emerging markets. If tariffs increase costs, or if China retaliates by restricting Tesla's operations, the company could lose its competitive edge. Even Boeing has experienced the consequences since China has delayed or cancelled orders for its aircraft as part of the trade tensions. In short, tariffs risk hurting some of the most iconic American companies that symbolize US innovation. It's also important to consider China's response. China has many levers it can pull to retaliate. It could restrict imports of US agricultural goods, such as soybeans, which would hurt American farmers. It could stop buying US natural gas, or it could delay deliveries of Boeing's and other major exports. In addition, China could make it more difficult for American companies to operate in its domestic market. For example, restrictions on iPhone sales or on Tesla's supply chains would create serious disruption. All of this shows that the trade war is not a one-sided policy. It invites retaliation that can damage US companies just as much as Chinese ones. Overall, while the goal of tariffs may be to reduce the US trade deficit or protect domestic industries, I think they carry significant risks. Consumers face higher prices, and iconic US firms may struggle both at home and abroad. In the long run, the policy could create tension in trade relationships and unintended consequences for both households and businesses.
With tariff driving up costs for American consumer and corporation, China has deployed a wide array of carefully chosen tools of retaliation. These range from financial leverage through US bonds to export restrictions on technologies and critical minerals such as iPhones and lithium, to limits on strategic sectors like energies and agriculture, including LNG, Boeing aircraft, and soybeans. At the same time, Beijing has pursued diplomatic maneuvers, strengthening ties with the European Union and ASEAN while brandishing its unreliable entity list. What struck me most in this part is the Chinese ability to use the measure in ways that are highly specific and deliberately calculated. The video makes clear that the countermeasures are anything but random. They are crafted to inflict maximum pressure. Soybeans, LNG, and Boeing aircraft are more than just commodity. They represent entire industry, livelihoods, and political consistency. The soybean story is especially telling after years of clawing back market share loss in 2018. US farmer now risks losing it again, and this time to Brazil. And this kind of blow is not merely economic, but it carries political consequences and personal costs for communities built around the export. Equally striking is the unreliable entity list. From my perspective, this is less bureaucratic tool than a warning shot. By curbing American companies from investing or trading in China, Beijing signaled that retaliation now extends beyond tariff. It sifts into regulatory restrictions, supply chain vulnerabilities, and the very framework of global business. The move may not dominate headlines like soybean tariff, yet they quietly shift incentive for some of the largest US manufacturers. My takeaway is that China is not merely reacting, but is strategizing. It's transforming trade into leverage, export into pressure points, and interdependence into political weapon. And that's, to me, is the real danger, not only the immediate disruptions in agriculture or aviation, but the enduring uncertainty that arises when trade itself turns into a battlefield.
Finally, the video highlights the global ripple effects of the US trade war. Higher tariffs are not just straining bilateral relations, they are resetting alliances and international institutions.
The video pointed out that Europe might actually move closer to China in response to US tariffs, and that some experts even regret supporting China's entry into the WTO. This is a sign that the trade war is not just about goods crossing borders, it's about trust, cooperation, and leadership in the international system. In my opinion, this is the most far-reaching consequence of the trade war. The true danger is not China's rise, but America's potential isolation. Tariffs may give short-term bargaining power, but they risk long-standing alliances, weakening trust, and undermining US leadership in the global system. So the lesson is clear. A trade war may hurt China, but it could hurt America's leadership even more. And power in the modern world is not measured only in tariffs or trade balances, but in who the world still chooses to stand beside. I highly recommend this video to anyone interested in understanding the full picture of the US-China trade war. It explains not just the numbers and tariffs, but also the ripple effects on businesses, consumers, supply chains, and even global alliances. Whether you care about economic, politics, or simply how this decision affects everyday life, the video makes the complexity clear and engaging. This is also the end of the reaction. Thank you for your listening.